Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Ian Small. Thank you all for joining. So over the next hour, I hope to bring you just a little bit of colour and warmth on this rather nasty winter evening, weather-wise here at least. So, southern Mexico, why am I talking about it? Well, I've been there a couple of times on holiday, and I was just in many ways surprised, probably through ignorance, at just the variety of habitats that there are in southern Mexico. So with these range from a sort of snow-capped volcanic peak. I mean that peak is over 18,000 feet high. Obviously, it runs right down to the coast. The areas between there, they can be dry and parched, desert-like, or semi-desert with cacti and arable plants, or they can be sort of lush and rich in vegetation. And obviously, there's a huge altitudinal gradient as well. So with all of that mix, there's just a huge range of habitats for wildlife to exploit, and butterflies certainly do that. So Mexico's butterflies. I've given talks previously to this group on butterflies from further down in South America. We call this whole area the neotropics, and Mexico is sitting right at the northern limit of that. Now, butterfly diversity peaks a bit further south, mainly around Colombia and Ecuador, both of which have a sort of staggering 5,000 species of butterflies. Mexico has less than that, but still has 1,800 to 2,000, depending on the source that you're looking at. So there's a bit of debate around that. You compare that to Europe, and it's 4 times as many species as we have in Europe. And Mexico is a slightly smaller area than Europe, so it relative to where we live, it's a very butterfly-rich area indeed. So why are there so many fewer butterflies in Mexico than further south in the neotropics? The biggest difference is in the number of the metal marks, the rhyodinids. They peak and are in quite large numbers much further south, but the numbers are beginning to drop off quite substantially by the time we get to Mexico. And here in Europe, those numbers have diminished to a single species, the Duke of Burgundy. So, southern Mexico, where am I talking about? So here's a map of the southern parts of Mexico. Mexico City highlighted there just as a frame of references. And I visited this area a couple of times on holidays, and these weren't butterfly-specific holidays; they were just general natural history holidays. But the areas I've been looking for butterflies in are sort of highlighted here. So ranging from the Sierra Gorda to the north of Mexico City, there, right the way down over to the coast, and right down here down to Oaxaca and the area around Oaxaca. And then on a separate trip in the Chiapas region, just down next to the border with Guatemala. So the extra circle that you're seeing on the map there is where that volcano is that I showed you on the earlier slide. So butterfly families, I'm sure you're all familiar with these, but again, just the nature and content of what's in these families is a bit broader in the neotropics than it is here. So I won't go through all the details. I'll bring this out as I talk through each of the sections. But the nature of what I'm going to do in this talk is work my way through representatives of each of these families, and just try to show you as much variety as the country has to offer. I'm going to start off with the skippers. Now, there are just so many species of skipper. It's quite remarkable. So 2,000 or 3,000 in the neotropics, but even Mexico has over 700 species of skipper, which is just a staggering number. But what it means is that more than 1 in 3 of Mexico's butterfly species are in fact skippers. And they come in a variety of shapes and forms, and it's much more varied than what we see in Europe, which are predominantly grass skippers and obviously the grizzle skippers. So I'm going to start off here with one of the highlights for me, at least, is seeing one of these beamer skippers. There's a whole family of related beamers, and they all have this general form of these incredibly bright blue metallic stripes and silver bars, and the different species are differentiated simply by the shape and nature of the blue and silver spars. But these are chunky, large butterflies, and they are always incredibly impressive to see. Blue is not uncommon within skippers. And so a couple more examples here. The two-barred flasher on the left there, it's obvious where it gets its English name from. Often sits like this with its wings wide open, showing that lovely blue sort of inner part to the wings. And the glorious blue skipper, Patches loxus, on the right is a real stunner when you see it. It's only the male that's got the blue color. The female is a lot more drab and keeps in the shadows, shall we say, as females of many species do, to avoid predation. But other forms of skipper occur, and this is a group called the bent wing skippers. And this is something I've mentioned in a previous talk. When I first came across these, I just assumed it was a damaged butterfly or one that hadn't finished pumping up its wings. But no, particularly with the example on the right here, that you can see that the front corners of the forewings are bent right over. And it really is quite remarkable to see this and to know that somehow this trait is inherited and carried through and defines the species. The great bentwing on the left is a larger butterfly, but the degree of bending is significantly less. Plus, I think the angle of my photograph has foreshortened it rather, so that you not really see the bending very, very significantly in that left-hand image. But the changes in morphology just keep coming with skippers. So the Xenophanes on the left is really quite a common skipper in the neotropics, and it's characterized by having these sort of translucent patches in the wings, so you can see the color of whatever it's sitting on, sort of through the wings of the butterfly. In this case, the yellow flower head. But I assume that this is just part of a mechanism to break up the shape of the butterfly, and as a consequence reduce predation. The butterfly on the right, has again a different shape to its wings, and again often sits with its wings really forward like this, exhibiting these lovely strong bands on the hind wings. But this is one of the many skippers that have red eyes. I hope you can see that on your screens, that particularly the eye on this side you can see should be bright red if your screen is big enough to see that. I do hope so. And of course there are many, hundreds even of grass type skippers. So the skipper on the right here is the male of the fiery skipper. I didn't call it out, but my introductory skipper slide had the female of this species on it. And so there's quite a significant sexual dimorphism between the two. But the biggest challenge for photographers, in looking at all and trying to identify the skippers is getting enough detail, because there are so many of these grass skippers. You often need to get both the upper side and the underwing pattern in order to get a positive identification. And I think we all know how flighty skippers can be. So if you're lucky enough to get a photograph of the upper side, you are fairly unlikely to get the underside as well, unless you are having a very lucky day. But some of the undersides are really rather striking when you do see them. I was particularly struck with this one. I'm particularly struck by the really sharp edge to the white band here, and then the way that it just gradually fades away, over the rest of the wings. But the other reason I'm sharing this one with you is because this species has hairy legs. There are some butterflies that do have hairy legs, but this is the only skipper that I'm aware of that does so. Now, some skippers, of course, look very similar to some of our European representatives. So these look very like our own grizzle skippers in Europe. And just like our European ones, then here these neotropical ones are very, very similar in appearance, and you need to look very closely at the upper wing and underwing patterns in order to be able to distinguish them. So very analogous in many ways to our European species. So the species on the left is the desert checker skipper. And as the name suggests, this is very much confined to very dry habitats. Whereas Orcus on the right is much more widespread throughout a large part of the neotropics. And there are some white skippers. And this is I think my favorite of the white skippers, the veined white skipper. I particularly like this. It just has such wonderful clean lines and sharp bands in the veins on the underside, you know, and just neat orange edges to it. But in particular, I don't know if you can see on your screens, but the wings appear to have a sheen to them. So you'd see the reflections here on the upper side and also on the underside. So I say just a particularly attractive little butterfly. But the forms of skippers just keep coming, and the final group that's completely different again are the long-tailed skippers. And this one is actually called the long-tailed skipper. And perhaps it has the longest tails of the long-tailed skippers. And these tend to be most of them are generally brownish, but they have a variety of different patterns on the underside here, and sometimes on the upper side as well. A couple of examples here are generally brown in color, arguably very similar wing patterns to them, but they're differentiated in the boldness of those pale marks on the wings. So very, very bold in the tanner long tail and very faint in the brown long tail. But of the long-tailed skippers, this one's my favorite. This is the Esmeralda long tail. The tails get shorter through these slides, so this has got perhaps the shortest tails of the long-tailed skippers, but that lovely blue coloration sort of coming down from the back of the body over the tail of the insect and into the tails here. That's beautiful. But then the green scales on the wings and over the front of the thorax and the head just make this the most delightful little butterfly, and particularly combining those with these very bold and sharp-edged silver markings on it. So a delightful butterfly. Apologize for the less than ideal sort of perch that it's on. This one chose to sit there on somebody's hat rather than on something that was more plant-like, but hopefully you'll forgive me that one. So moving on, let's move on to the swallowtails, the Papilionidae. Now, they are a broader group than just swallowtails in the neotropics, and they have these groups called kite swallowtails and cattle hearts. But just as in Europe, you may see a few of these flying around, but the number you're able to photograph is usually an awful lot less, fewer than the number you actually see, because these things very rarely sit down or don't sit down for long. So on the screen here is the only kite swallowtail that I'm able to show you. This is the dark kite swallowtail. And what do we mean by kite swallowtail? They all have these very long tails, obviously at the tail part of the insect. But generally the kite swallowtails look very similar, but they're just differentiated in the patterns here. But so what are cattle hearts? Well, cattle hearts are dark butterflies. They're generally black or very dark brown in coloration, and any color that they have is usually confined on the wings, at least, to the hind wings rather than the forewings. But the one thing about the cattle hearts is they all have these red marks on the body of the insect. And in this example, obviously the hind wing has these really bright red lunules on it. Others will have red and green, or just green, or red and white. So there's a bit of variety there. So the only other cattle heart I got a photograph of was this rather elegant Montezuma's cattle heart. Again, you see all the red marks on the body of the insect, but that lovely array of red lunules around the border, on the edge of the hind wing there. So the cattle hearts all feed on poisonous plants, and the same food plant is used by the swallowtail, and it goes by the local name of the pipe vine. And this is the pipe vine swallowtail. And what we have on this slide is actually the same mating pair is present on both the pictures. It's just that in the one on the left, my photograph was photobombed by another male trying to get in on the act. Unsuccessfully, I hasten to add. But rather than spoiling the photograph, what it's done is it's enabled me to let you see both the underside of the butterfly and the upper side in the same slide here. So as you can see, the upper side lacks any of these orange markings, but the blue extends over most of the hind wings. The undersides are characterized with the blue background, but these huge, bold orange spots. So really very distinctive patterning. I noticed that the spots on the body of the insect are white rather than red, as in the cattle hearts. And this is the only swallowtail I saw that actually looks like a European swallowtail. This is the two-tailed swallowtail, two-tailed so-called because there's actually two tails coming out from the same point here. The second smaller one is actually hidden just in the angle of my photograph here. So let's move on again. Let's move on to the perids, the whites, as we would think of them. But in the neotropics, that includes the groups of mimic whites and sulfurs. Mexico has about 70 species in all of these. And on the slide here is just an example of one of the many grass whites, the mimosa yellow. Now, all of these, sorry, I said grass whites, grass yellows. All of these have, distinctive patterns when they are fresh, with sort of speckles and dots on a yellow background. But as the butterfly ages, they lose scales and those markings disappear or appear to change, and the ground color gets paler and paler. And so unless you're seeing fresh insects, it can be really quite challenging to identify them accurately. But this is one example of what's called a mimic white. What do we mean by a mimic white? What it means is that this butterfly is not itself poisonous, but it is mimicking another butterfly which actually is poisonous, and therefore, by means of doing so, avoiding predation. Now, what I've been unable to do is to identify the butterfly that this species is actually mimicking, so I can compare. And ideally, I would have been able to show you what it was mimicking beside it, but I haven't been able to do that. So apologies for that. But I'm assuming that the poisonous nature is sort of indicated somehow by this orangey red bar across the wings here. But not all whites are white. And among my particular favourites are these dart whites, which are generally essentially black butterflies with some white markings on them. And the undersides are further adorned with, as you can see, these lovely yellow marks, and usually a splash or two of red on towards the body of the insect as well. So the narrow-banded dart white has much more of the dark ground colour visible, and more of these yellow dots, making it very, very, very attractive. The Mexican dart white has a much broader and fuller white bar across the wings, and correspondingly fewer yellow markings. And this is another white, usually known as the darkened white, but some sources may still refer to it as the confusing white, which is a name it used to have. Confusing, why? Well, because it's not white. So it's difficult to look at something like this from a European perspective and think of this as one of the whites. But here is one that is white, mostly white anyway, but this is the common green-eyed white. Hopefully you can see that bright green eye. So the genus Leptophobia, which this is a a member of, all of them have these bright green eyes. And so that, again, just seeing the bright green eye lets you know what the genus is, and then you can look for further details to identify which particular species it might be within that. Moving on to the sulphurs, these dainty sulphurs I found remarkably aptly named, delightful little insects. And these two are characteristic of very dry habitats. Again, this was an area where there were lots of cacti and very little moisture around at all. But these butterflies seem to be thriving. Perhaps the most common sulphur is this cloudless sulphur. The males on the left and the females on the right. Many of the sulphurs have this pair of bold white marks on the underside, larger in the female. But the female has a much darker ground colour and more sort of maroon markings coming through than the male does. And there's another example, the dark apricot sulphur, still with the same silver marks, but with much more of the red colours coming through, and both in the ground colour and on all the markings coming through. And exemplified, I think, by the fact that this one is actually on red flowers. In contrast, the pale sulphur on the right has no markings on the wings at all. Instead, it just has these alternating bands of sort of lemon and lime colours. And it looks so bright as a consequence. And it also looks remarkably delicate. It's noticeable how the absence of markings makes the butterfly somehow look much more frail. And these angled sulphurs look very similar to our brimstones, don't they? They differ just a little bit in the ground coloration and in the shapes of the wings between the white and the yellow angled sulphurs. So that you've got a hook on the corner of the forewings, which is a different shape between the two, and also this angle in the hindwings differs in the two of them. And this angle in the hindwings is also seen in other examples in the sulphurs. So this Salome yellow, for example, you can see has got a similar pattern here. This is one of the grass yellows that stands out as being a bit different, with all these, again, reddish markings here. But the tailed orange is really bright and bold, as you can see. But you get the extent of the shape here it sort of comes to an extreme in this butterfly relative to the others. So I'm going to move on now to the lycaenids, what in Europe we think of as blues, coppers, and hair streaks. In the neotropics, you should reverse the order. It is predominantly hair streaks with a few blues and hardly any coppers. So in Mexico, there's roughly 180 species of lycaenids. Of those, there are 2 incredibly rare species of copper, rare and local, and only 9 species of blue. All the rest are hair streaks. So when you start off just with a couple of blues, this is perhaps the most common that one comes across, the eastern tailed blue. You can see the tails, I'm sure, on the hindwing here in both the images, and a lovely clean underside with these lovely orange lunules and the black eye spot there, making it really standing out really very clearly. The upper side coloration is very similar to a large blue, for example, or even a charcoal blue. 2 other blues that one comes across quite regularly, Saronus on the left and Cassius on the right. Very rarely, or rarely when I was there, opened their wings. And so I actually don't have photographs of the upper side of these 2. But they're noticeably very different, with the Leptotes, the Cassius blue on the right being a much paler ground colour. But moving on to the hair streaks, this doesn't look like a hair streak, does it? This is one of the cycadians, which are a small subgroup of the hair streaks. And this is the superb Cycadian, and believe me, it really was to see something to see it. A really stunning insect. Again, quite a large butterfly, but that black coloration with all these white marks and these blue splashes on the underside. And this one was just sunning itself early one morning and was essentially tame as several of us sort of walked around and took lots of photographs of it. There is a Mexican Cycadian, which unfortunately we didn't see, and the other Cycadian species don't have all of these white spots on the wings. Instead, the white spots they have are restricted solely to this outer half of the hindwing. The rest is all black, and they have some coloration in the body or at the base of the wing here instead. So this one is really quite different from the others. But this is a hair streak, isn't it? This is an absolute stunner. This is the sky blue hair streak, much bigger than any hair streak I've seen in Europe. And hopefully on your screens you can see just that little corner of the forewing sticking out here, so you can see what the upper side of this insect looks like. Like many hair streaks, it just doesn't sit with its wings open, or certainly I have not seen it with its wings open, but to see it in flight is just remarkable, really bright. And I notice also that it's got matching blue eyes. There aren't many insects, any butterflies that have got blue eyes, so lovely. But what's striking, and particularly with the pose I got it here, look at this amazing false head. Look at this big bold eye and the antennae and the forelegs of so a predator coming across this insect will automatically, instinctively head for this end, away from where it's going to do the damage here. And like many hair streaks, look at the shape of the wings. There's a bulge on the forewing here, and the head is just nestled down under there. You'll see that across several species. So a similar concept in these Panthiades hair streaks, where you can see the zebra stripes differ between the species, but again, the same intent, pointing away from where the head of the insect is in each case. There are different forms of hair streak, of course, and the tiger eye hair streak on the left here is fairly unique, but obviously it gets its name from the tiger eye gemstone. But this is a pretty good impression of an eye there, don't you think? But whether it's intentionally so from avoiding predation, I doubt, simply because that is so close to the body of the insect. I think this is just a human interpretation rather than anything else. But similar colorway in many ways, the gold bordered hair streak on the right with that lovely gold edge to the wings. But of course, there are many hair streaks that look more similar in design to those that we have in Europe. And there's just it seems to be an almost infinite variety of pattern that can occur on the undersides of these. But also, we get green hair streaks, just like we have our own green hair streak here in the UK. And these two, in particular, I came across this species on the left here, the Janaeus. It's got this wonderful, it's a very small butterfly, but it's got this almost metallic bluey green color. And again, if your screen is big enough, you might just see there's a corner of the forewing just sticking out here, which is deep blue in color. So I assume the upper side of this insect, has blue on the wings, but I didn't see it. It sat and didn't move, just kept its wings closed. The species on the right there, the ground color, it's very similar in the shade of green to the green we have in our own green hair streak. But this next hair streak is different again, and isn't this marvelous? This wonderful transition from a green background on the hind wings to this lovely rich orange color here, with borders of green at either end of it, and this wonderful banding and all these blue markings down here. This is just a stunning insect. I was really quite taken with it. I was taken with it even more when I realised what it was and realised it's the same genus as our own green hair streak at home. This is Calophrys zami, and our UK green hair streak is Calophrys rubai. So, if only was the thought that came to mind. Wouldn't it be nice if we had this in the UK as well? So, moving on to the metal marks, I've already said that they're fewer in number than further south, but there are still a good few more than we get up here in Europe. So they're all characterized by having sort of metallic colorations on parts of the wings. Oftentimes, however, that depends on having the light right to be able to see it. In poor light, then they're just going to appear dull. So the most frequent one that we came across was this one, the falcate tan mark, which has this really deep orange ground color across the underside. The upper side, without the light on it, as I just said, is a fairly dull affair, but with a bit of light, and you can see this almost metallic gold-edged, orangey gold edging to it. Now, this species I've shown you in previous presentations, the shining blue Lycea. I've only shown the male in the past on the left. The female on the right is, as you say, completely different in its coloration, very different color palette. And again, as I said, in relation to another species, the glorious blue skipper, females are often much duller in their coloration, just because they need to be a bit more discreet going about all the egg laying, and their survival rates would be far reduced if they were as easy to see as the males. But among the metal marks, the Rhetus genus comprises several species, all of which have this general sort of almost triangular shape to them, and have these wonderful long tails. They often have these gorgeous metallic blues and reds and other colors on them. Delightful in text to see. Not as big as perhaps as this photograph suggests they might be, but always stunning to see. By the time you get as far north as Mexico, then this periander, Rhetus periander, is the only one that's present in Mexico. There are several others further south. But one thing that is just gobsmacking to come across anywhere is one of the jewel marks, and the Sarota genus in this case. And these are just, as I said, they're gobsmacking. Your jaw drops when you come across insects like this. And you just think, why has nature, decided to produce an insect like this? What are the ecological advantages to having a gaudy color scheme like this on your wings? It's beyond my comprehension, but boy, is it wonderful to look at and to come across in the wild. So I move on to the final family, but they are the largest family, with all these subgroups in them. It's obviously going to be a whistle-stop tour. I can't pretend to do it justice in the time that we've got, but I will show you a representative sampling across the different groups and try and draw out some of the differences, at least, between what we have in Mexico and what we have in Europe. So I'm going to start with the browns here. The Satyrids. What we have are things like meadow brown and ringlet in this group, and obviously within the neotropics, many of them are brown as well, but there are also many others that are much brighter in their coloration. A couple of examples here: the Mexican pine satyr on the left there is found in high altitude pine forests, and is just this wonderful rich coloration, richness to the colors here, and all these eye spots around the outer part of the wings. And the Oxyoschistus genus, whenever you come across one of those, you will be struck by the boldness of the patterns and the colors on the wings. This was the only one we saw in Mexico, but it really was very, very striking. And there are white satyrs as well. So here's what's called the double white satyr, so predominantly white on the upper side, but the underside, these very strong white bars. So it's called double white solely because the inner ones are a bit more muted in their coloration, but not this is a reasonably fresh specimen. So pardon me, you can see all the marks fairly clearly. There's wonderful array of lunules, eye spots all down the outer side here. And this American snout is the only example of the Libethane that is certainly in Mexico. We have a single example in Europe as well. We have the nettle tree butterfly. And if you're familiar with that, you will see the similarities straight away. This group are characterized by having these incredibly long palps. And then the butterflies always sit with their antennae forwards, as you can see particularly here, generally sitting over the palps. So they take on this particular shape and appearance when you see them sitting. So that the wing shapes are generally similar regardless of where in the world you come across a representative of this. And so that they're really quite remarkable. There's few of these species, but there seems to be a representative everywhere you go. Now the emperors. I hope many of you have seen purple emperors in the UK and be familiar with the wonderful sort of blue sheen, the blue iridescence one gets on the upper side when the light is right. So a couple of examples here of undersides of emperors. The one on the left, I never did get it to see open its wings. The one on the right, the silver emperor. We did, and these are both photographs of the same insect, just seconds apart. And as you can see on the left, the angles were wrong, no blue whatsoever. On the right, that wonderful blue iridescence, really bold and bright, shiny across the wings. Also striking with this was, look at the proboscis. It's a luminous green color. So really quite striking and remarkable. Now, like all the emperors, they tend to be attracted down to noxious things. So apologies for the where that was sitting. So moving on, again, another grouping, tropical brush fruit. So starting off with the Closine genus, and this is a Mexican endemic. This is the Oaxacan checker spot, and got this in the hills above Oaxaca, in the south of the country. Another example, the Thiona checker spot. You can see strong similarities to some of our small European skippers. That's not skippers, fritillaries, what am I saying? But in the general sort of design of the patterning on the upper side and underside. Some of the Closines, rather than being called checker spots, are called patches. And on the left, we've got the gaudy patch, which is probably very black in color, but you can see those gaudy red patches. And the crimson patch on the right, generally pale underneath with that small bit of red coloration, but it's called crimson patch because of what's on the upper side, these bold marks on the upper side. Now, these butterflies were not sunning themselves. These were all taking salts from this wall, this old crumbling wall. Obviously was leaching salts that the butterflies wanted to get. So I'm sure you often come across or heard of butterflies mud puddling. Well, this is effectively the same thing, but on a vertical wall. The Hyphanartia genus always have the English names, including the word map or mapwing. And why do they have that? Because the undersides always have fairly intricate patterns of lines, which are likened in many ways to the contours on a map. The upper sides are routinely really very bright and attractive on these insects, as you can see here in this orange mapwing. Many butterflies sit on the sides of trees, and this particular example, Blomfield's Beauty, was one that we saw many of during our last visit there, just last year. And this, you can see the complexity of the pattern here is really quite striking. The dagger wings, another next grouping, all in the Marpesia genus. Why are they called dagger wings? Well, because they've all got these dagger-like tails coming out of the wings. This one's obviously been broken off a bit, but at this side you can see that tail is fairly intact. Now, just as we were talking about with the hair streaks, look at the pattern on the butterfly. All these lines pointing away from the head of the insect. And what have we got down here? That looks like a remarkable example of a false head to me. These wonderful eyes and this little tail, it's actually imitating a beak. So that there's a really very good example of a false head at the wrong end of this insect. So obviously attracting a predator away from where it will do most damage. Similar concept in this many-banded dagger wing, and this was the example of this group that we saw most common when we were in Mexico. Many of you will be familiar with the butterfly on the right here, which is the monarch, but its sister from the same genus, the queen, may be less familiar to you. So as you can see, the monarch has all these dark veins across the wings, whereas the queen lacks the dark veining on the upper side here, and is a much more clean and slightly brighter ground coloration. And that coloration is sort of carried into the underside on the queen, but here at least we have the black veining to mimic the monarch. But in the monarch, the underside is much paler again. So again, they're quite different, but although clearly related species. The Adelpha genus is a very large genus. They all have the English names of something sister, and Mexico has a huge number of these. I haven't counted, but I think it's over 50 species of Adelpha in Mexico alone. So it's a very large genus, and they all have this sort of general shape and pattern to them of a brown ground color with darker lines, sort of coming down across the wings towards the tail, but then various amounts of orange and white banding or spots on the wings, and the precise patterning of that is what identifies the species. So two examples here. The pointer sister here, it's that tiny little point, little orange point, that gives this one the name. The species more often than not sit on the ground with their wings open, but when you get the opportunity to see the undersides are particularly attractive. I'm going to go on now to talk about the clear wings, the Ithomeinae, and starting here with this example of Klug's clear wing. Just to draw attention to the fact that wings there's no black and white, pardon the pun, in terms of whether it's clear or not clear. And so if you look at the hind wings, they're clearly translucent, but there's a residual color here. There's definitely orange coloration. And you look at the forewing coloration, it's much more transparent, but then there's these patches of less transparency. And as a consequence, it looks like dappled light and shade across these wings, and I'm sure that's the reason that it's done this way. Now, obviously, some of these species have properly clear wings, and the simple clear wing, I think, is called that way for that reason. So the wings are essentially completely clear, bar these tiny small patches, and of course this white bar that runs across. In contrast, Paula's clear wing, the wings are still essentially clear, but they're a little bit more translucent, just not quite so transparent. And certainly on the forewings, all of that stops when you get halfway up, and the rest is completely filled in. Normally, you would see these on their own, but just occasionally you'll come across multiple clear wings together, and we came across these group of simple clear wings on the top of a bush. Rather nice. And just to show that there's exceptions to all the rules, this is a clear wing whose wings are not clear anywhere, because this clear wing is actually mimicking something else, which is poisonous. And so, like so often in neotropics, there is a degree of mimicry goes on between species. So something pretending to be something else. So I move on quickly now to the next group, the leaf wings. Very few examples in Europe, but much more in the neotropics. And you see, looking at these, yes, I've been able to photograph these in bright sun away from leaves, but I hope you can see that put them on a leafy background or in leaf litter on the ground where they're often seen feeding, then you will instantly see that they will essentially disappear very, very easily indeed with these the shapes and the colorations that they have. Note also, if you can see on your screens, just look at the eyes, and that the eyes take on completely the ground color and markings of the insect itself, so that the head essentially disappears. And again, from a camouflage perspective, that's so advantageous to an insect to do that. Two more examples. That on the left, again photographed out in the open, one of the cecropians, the tailed cecropian, but on the right, perhaps the biggest one, the Orion cecropian. When I say biggest, it's fairly chunky. If you open the palm of your hand, then the span of your hand is usually between 5 and 6 inches. That's the wingspan of this butterfly. So we are talking of a large butterfly here. But look how well the colors and the markings make it just almost incredibly difficult to make out when it's sitting on the bark of this tree like this. That you can see this particular tree, the way the bark is flaked in places almost exactly mimics what's on the underside of these wings. I do hope you can make out the butterfly whose wings are here and the eye is there. Note also how long the antennae are on these, quite remarkably long. But the long wings, the heliconias, are many people's favourite, and this became one of my favourite butterflies in Mexico because I hadn't come across it before. This is the Mexican silver spot. The Dione genus all have big silver spots on the undersides of the wings, but this one has bigger, bolder spots than any of the others. But what makes it stand apart is this intense, deep red on the underside of the forewing. Really shines in the sunshine, and the upper side is sort of fritillary orange, if you like, but all this forewing area where the red is on the underside has this really deep rusty orange coloration to it. So a really, really attractive butterfly. Same genus, the fritillary. This is a bit more widespread than the Mexican silver spot. And you can see the same silver spots on the underside, but to a much reduced extent, and lacking this time that red coloration. The upper side looks much more fritillary-like in its patterning, and that pattern is almost exactly reproduced here. And this is a fritillary. This is the Mexican fritillary. This is a smaller butterfly. The wings are not so elongated as in the Diones, but here the underside is designed much more for camouflage than for show. The heliconias give all sorts of examples of how nature explores all the options. So here nature has come up with a design pattern of bands on the wings and on the inner quadrant of the hind wings, and has decided that red and white are the colours to use, but it's explored and developed opposite colourways. So the Erratoheliconian above has red on the wing, on the forewings, whereas the Mexican longwing underneath has red on the hind wings. Otherwise, it's essentially a very similar design. But of the heliconias, this is one of my favourite. This is Sappho, just because so much of the wing, the upper side, has this blue sheen to it. And it seems to be a bit more tolerant of the angle that you're standing at, so that more of the wing stays blue depending on your position. See that the tip here is essentially dark, so that was obviously at the limits of the angles. But you see that really deep blue all across here, and still a blue hint on this side. The other blue one is here, Sarah, but has much less blue coloration, and the white markings are much smaller. And I include this, the tiger-striped longwing, because I suspect that this or one of its closely related family are what the clearwing mechanitis was actually mimicking. If you remember the mechanitis, that clearwing that had no clear patches, was mimicking something. The pattern looks remarkably similar to what we have here. And it's the final grouping, the true brushfoots. Starting off here with one of the banners. The banners are, as the name suggests, they stick out. They are remarkably obvious. It has been described to me as the family as, think of red admirals on steroids. So they're really big and bold. These, and just like our red admirals, when they close their wings, it's very dark, and obviously, when the wings are open, they want to be seen. When the wings are closed, they don't. But in this group are the 88s, many people's favourites. Something that we just don't have at all in Europe, but so we really look forward to seeing when we're in this part of the world. And the one that we saw most commonly was this one, was Anna's 88, which has really remarkably clean lines to it. There's a sort of very clean underside, a very clear 88, predominantly white with black markings on the hind wing underside, and the upper side really clear blue, metallic blue markings, sky blue markings, and this lovely blue dusting on the forewing. So a really elegant butterfly. The other one that was flying with it, just in lower numbers, was this one, the Navy 88. And as you can see, the underside is a bit more muddy, a bit more smudged. So it's not as clean a white. And the 88s, the numbers are a bit more darker coloration, and there's more red comes into the markings here. But it was the upper side that gives this butterfly its name, because when you get the angles just right, just as I showed you earlier with that emperor, this over emperor, when you get the angles just right, there is this incredible navy blue sheen to the wings. It's incredibly fleeting, because the butterflies are frequently, they're not still, they're moving around. The wings are moving, the butterflies are moving. And so despite numerous attempts, this was the only photograph I got that reasonably represented the flash that you get as these butterflies just catch the light at the right angle. And it is a flash, that's what it catches your eye as you turn. Not all the 88s have that sort of colorway. So the white patched 88 here, as you can see, is sort of generally brown, fawny brown colors on the underside, but still quite clear 88 markings, little hints of red, and a much darker upper side here. Despite watching this one for quite some time, I didn't see any blue coloration at all. I don't think it has any. But this 88 was utterly gorgeous. This is an orange striped 88, similar sort of brownish underside, slightly cleaner markings, but really this flash of orange that one gets on the underside of the forewing was just, well, wonderful, absolutely wonderful. So really lucky here. This was a late afternoon. The angle of the sun was low, and it was really catching this, just really perfectly. Delightful insect. There's a couple of blue wings, again, which were new to me, which I came across in Mexico. This one is called the whitened blue wing. Quite extensive pale markings on the forewings. The blue wings, the blue are in fact blue bars, which are more lilac than blue certainly in this example. Well, I think in this species in general. But this contrasts with the Mexican blue wing, which you will have seen it on an earlier slide. I showed this just as part of the background. But here these blue lines are really big and bold. This is a big bold butterfly with much less weight on the forewing tips, and really bright blue until you get down to the hind wings, where it is transitioning more to a purpley blue rather than a bright blue. But a really striking butterfly. Again, when it closes its wings, it's pretty nondescript. I'm going to finish off with just a few of the crackers, the Hamadryas genus, all characterized by generally found sitting on the sides of trees, sometimes otherwise, of course, as I'll show you, but more often than not, this is where you come across them. And the crackers have this wonderful patterning to the wings, and usually a very contrasted, very different underside to the upper side. Why are they called crackers? Well, the males are able to make a cracking sound with their wings, which they usually do in sort of territorial disputes. So I'm told. I've seen lots of crackers, but I've never actually managed to witness that. So one of these days, perhaps. Two more crackers with quite extensive amounts of blue in the coloration, both incredibly attractive. So the one above is the orange cracker, orange because the underwing is orange. Unfortunately, I never saw the underside because it was sitting on the side of a tree, so 20 feet away. The starry cracker, I'm sure you can see why it's called a starry cracker. This is the female. The female has these white bars. The male lacks the white bars, and so it is just a starry background all across the wings. Really quite remarkable. And finally, to show you the red cracker. Again, similar in design, if you like, to that female starry cracker with the blue patterning and bold white bars across. But as you've already guessed, it's called a red cracker. Why? Because of the red on the underwing. And I'm going to sort of leave you with this because here I was just struck with how I'd never seen any other butterfly laying its eggs in chains like this on its food plant. I've heard of moths doing similar things, but I'm not aware of any other butterflies that do this. Perhaps it's just my ignorance. So if somebody can enlighten me, then all well and good. But with that, I will thank you for your patience and happy to take any questions.
Brilliant, thanks, Ian. That's a really amazing talk. It's fantastic photographs again. It's really lovely to see them all. Right, we've I don't think we've got any questions in the chat yet, but I've got I did have a question myself actually, because I was looking up the mimic white, the Jeffy's mimic white, to see if I could work anything out. I mean, AI was suggesting clear wings or tiger wings it was mimicking, but I couldn't see the resemblance myself. But I mean, would it be mimicking them in the same colors we see, or would it be in an ultraviolet colors, do you think?
But who knows? Who knows? It would be mimic, and how do butterflies perceive things? So it could, many of the mimics that we are familiar with are just exact color mimics, as I showed you with the later example of the mechanitis tiger wing mimic. But that may not be the limit of things. There may be other factors that come into it that, as you say, beyond our visual range.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anyone else would like to ask a question? Brian?
Yeah, I have a question. I was once lucky enough to go to one of the main monarch overwintering site, and there were hundreds and hundreds of Mexicans there. It was the day after Christmas, and they were reverential towards the monarchs. And yet, in all the rest of the time I spent in Mexico, mainly southern Mexico, I never saw anybody looking at butterflies at all, and paying any attention to butterflies. Lots of people looking at birds, but I just wondered if I missed something. Did I miss something? Were people on your trip? Were on your trips? Did you see people interacting in a positive way with butterflies?
In a word, no, Brian, no. But perhaps that's because of where we were, we tended not to be with places where there were many local people around. We tended to be pretty much in areas on our own at the times we were there. So it's difficult to know what the locals would do. But I suspect that it's pretty much as you have found yourself, that it's us Europeans mostly, who are interested in natural history, or who've got the time and the money to be able to go and do this stuff.
There we go.
Whereas if you're living in countries like Mexico, your concerns are much more about food to the mouth and clothes on your back.
Absolutely.
Than of indulging yourself in the way that we're able to. So perhaps it's as simple as that. I don't know. Perhaps I'm oversimplifying.
That's probably it. I made a list of the butterflies that you showed that have shown up in my yard in Foxborough, Massachusetts. Number 1, fiery skipper. Number 2, long-tailed skipper. Number 3, pipevine swallowtail. Number 4, cloudless sulfur. Number 5, eastern tail blue. Number 6, monarch. An American snout has shown up in my son's yard. So yeah, they have remarkable ranges. I was once lucky enough to go on a trip to Antarctica, and fiery skipper came aboard and stayed on board until we got to Antarctica. So that I always brag to my friends that I have seen a butterfly in Antarctica and fiery skipper. You showed the female and the male. The one on this boat was a male. I bet you saw a lot of those.
Just a few.
Oh, a few. Okay.
Yeah. We didn't spend long in any one habitat, so we were, moving around quite a lot. So where they occurred, there were a good few of them, but we'd move somewhere else with a different habitat, and they wouldn't be present, and other things wouldn't be.
Sure.
Right. Does anyone else have any questions for Ian? Feel free to unmute yourself if you don't have to take show the camera if you don't want to.
How long was your trip, Ian? It's absolutely fantastic photographs you've taken.
Thank you.
Can't believe how beautiful they all are.
There were 2 trips. I think each of them was round about 2 weeks.
Thank you.
So in all, there's a month of time, between those. But I think, as I said at the start, that these weren't specific butterfly tours; they were natural history tours with a bit of, culture and archaeology thrown in as well. So.
Sure.
How did you sort of assess the state of the habitat, Ian? There, I mean, is it being rapidly turned into plantations, or broadly stable, or what, under threat, or improving? is any sign of conservation taking place? I mean, what's the outlook for these butterflies?
I think their outlook is reasonable if they're fairly wide, as Brian said, for many of these, they're fairly widespread. So I think, I didn't see any conservation going on, but the flip side of that, I didn't see any development going on anywhere close to these things. So most of the places we were relatively protected, in theory at least. What that means in practice, I'm not sure, but
yeah. Okay.
Spectacular presentation, my friend.
Great. Okay, we've got a comment from Stuart just saying, thanks for the lovely photos and such a lovely talk. And Karen's saying the same. Amazing photos. So having been to Thailand myself last summer and trying to take photographs of tropical butterflies hiding in forests and the like, I can see that you've done really well to get so many good ones. Certainly more than I managed.
Okay. Thank you.
Right. So great. Okay. Well, Paul and Janet were saying they've just joined Butterfly Conservation and this was their first event. Thank you. Excellent. So we can't always promise this range of butterflies, I'm afraid. The English ones might be a bit of a letdown after this, but they're very engaging in their own way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay. Right. Well, unless anyone else has thought of anything else they'd like to ask, say now, however, hold your peace. Just to remind you, the next event is the ones on hedges and hair streaks, which will be on Wednesday, the 11th of February. So that promises to be a really interesting talk, and it's directly related to the conservation work that we've been doing in Hertfordshire. So I think will be of interest. So do tune in again then. And in the meantime, hope you have a lovely, not too wet, not too cold, but good enough rest of January and start of February. Cheerio.
Thanks very much, everyone. Bye.
Bye.